US President Donald Trump has decided to withdraw special trade privileges for India. Trump wrote to the US Congress declaring his intention to withdraw the generalized system of preferences which allows lower US duties on exports from 121 developing countries. India was the biggest beneficiary of the program in 2017 and enjoyed exemptions on goods worth $5.6 billion. Reacting to the development, India's Commerce Secretary said the impact would be minimal and would not be more than 190 million. Sources in the Ministry of External Affairs said India has been trying to work out a reasonable and balanced trade package with the United States, but the flexibility shown by India did not meet the requirement of the US trade representative. Withdrawal of GSP benefits to India would take 60 days and India will continue to negotiate. But for all practical purposes, the trade package that India was trying to work out has not hit a dead end. Let's now go across to our guest joining us on this discussion. Our former Foreign Secretary Kamal Sibal, former Department of Economic Affairs Secretary R. Gopalan, the DG and CEO of Federation of Indian Export Organizations, Ajay Sahai, and former envoy to the WTO, Jayant Dasgupta. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for taking time out to be with us this evening. And I'd like to begin with Mr. Gopalan. Mr. Gopalan, the Commerce Ministry believes that the impact of US withdrawal of GSP benefits would be minimal and very moderate. It won't have a major effect on the Indian industry. What do you feel about this?
I agree with this because it's about $5.6 billion is export, which is coming under GSP withdrawal, and against our total export of 315 to 320 billion US dollars, and the loss will be close to about 190 million US dollars. Now look at it from the viewpoint of India's total trade with US, about 135 billion dollars. About 80 billion, around 80 billion in goods, about 55 billion in services. US's deficit is quite about 25 to 30 billion dollars with us. Now, the better way, the one way to make this, take the small industries which will get into a problem, especially the handicrafts, marine industries, and agricultural exports. The way is to make them more competitive, get the end-to-end manufacturing and processing for fisheries so that losses are reduced in the whole process, make our handicrafts advertise so well that they have an effect on the consumer in US to pick up these handicraft goods. There are a lot of ways in which these things can be overcome. The pain which will be caused to the set of industries can be overcome very easily. And I think it's an effort which is worth taking and should take. I think we should not be so fussy about this $5.6 billion about against the total export of about $320 billion.
Okay, so you're saying that we should not be very concerned about this. The impact would be minimal. And I'd like to get in Ajay Sahai and get a perspective on what the exporters feel about this. Ajay Sahai, Mr. Gopalan, and also the Commerce Ministry, the Ministry of External Affairs feels that the impact would be minimal and GSP was anyway non-reciprocal and non-discriminatory and it is not based on India's actions at all. This is what the Ministry of External Affairs was telling us. How badly would it affect exporters? Are you concerned with this news that came in earlier today?
In fact, we were getting ready ourselves since US started review of GSP in April 2018. And though you have said it clearly that it is on non-reciprocal basis, US has linked it with market access and tariff reduction. So this was something which has not come out of the blue. And I do agree that the impact will be marginal. Our exports to the US in 2017 stood at around $15.57 billion. And GSP gain was just -90 million, which is 0.4% of my total exports. Let us also keep in mind that the bulk of items which we are exporting under GSP is intermediate and semi-finished products, which helps also in the cost effectiveness and price competitiveness of US manufacturing. For chemical sector, which is by and large the biggest chunk of our exports under the GSP, the prices may go up as high as around 5%, which has to be borne by the US manufacturing sector. On the face of it, the impact will be marginal, but let us also add that there are few products, of course the list is extremely small, where the GSP gain is 4%, 6% or even more. There we have to study whether the GSP withdrawal will be absorbed by the exporters or government needs to provide some kind of hand-holding so that the market access to the US is not lost. It is very important for us to retain the market. I'm not sure whether exporter would be able to diversify into the new market quickly. So at least for those number of products, one needs to look into how we can provide some kind of hand-holding, some kind of fiscal support, so their export to US is maintained. At the end of the day, for the importer, it is the issue of landed price. So if you pass
what are the products? What are the products?
If you pass on some benefit.
What would be some of the products that could be impacted?
In fact, US GSP is granted on a 10-digit tariff line, and therefore the product broadly will be the processed food sector, certain tariff line in processed food sector, entire leather sector except footwear, hand tools, certain engineering items including cycle, certain made-ups like pillow cover, cushion cover. In the apparel sector, women dress is one of the products which will be impacted. I'm only looking into the products where the GSP benefit is 3% or more, because in the rest of the products, I think exporter will be able to absorb the losses.
Okay, I'd like to get in Jayant Dasgupta at this point. Mr. Dasgupta, US had been asking for greater market access for its dairy products, medical devices, and ICT products as well. But do you feel that India had any room to maneuver when it came to these products?
There are two things which need to be borne in mind. First, the first point is that the GSP is a preferential access which is granted by developed countries. And it is premised on the fact that it would help people living in poverty and without full employment to get employment in developing countries. The second point is that it is to be granted without any reciprocal market access being sought. And the US has sought reciprocal market access in dairy and, as you mentioned, medical devices and ICT. Now, the other point which needs to be mentioned is that if India were to reduce the duties outside of an FTA on these three categories, it will have to do it on an MFN basis to all countries which are members of the WTO. And that would have far-reaching implications. So India did try to accommodate. I think in agriculture package was offered to the US, but it found it below its expectations. So I think India has done its bit. It will keep on negotiating. But at the end of the day, the GSP is something which is discretionary. Of course, if a country is to be graduated, as the US wants to do it to India now, it has to be done on a non-discriminatory and rational basis. Because this is something which the European Union tried to do to India way back in 2002 when it tried to give certain benefits to Pakistan because it was helping in the anti-drug trafficking effort. Now, that was done on a discriminatory basis. So the WTO dispute settlement body ruled on that occasion that countries which are similarly placed should be treated similarly. There should not be any discrimination. So if the US decides to use its discretion, it has to be done on a rational basis and on a non-discriminatory basis.
All right, non-discriminatory basis, a rational basis, and as you pointed out, and that was important, that if India does this for the United States, gives greater access for medical devices, ICT, and agricultural goods and dairy products, it'll have to give other countries the same status as well. I'd like to get in Ambassador Kamal Sibal at this point. Ambassador Sibal, the US trade deficit with China is about $566 billion. With India, it's about $22 billion. So why this insistence on correcting the trade deficit with India, which is a very close ally? And if we take information communication technology products, the imports would just be about 2% of the entire package from the United States. And sources are saying that if anybody benefits from lower tariffs on mobile phones and smartwatches, it would be China and not the United States.
Well, you know what President Trump's obsession is with the trade deficit. And he's hitting at all countries, whether they are adversaries or whether they are allies. We had thought that given the fact that our relationship with the United States has reached certain levels today, that they will take a strategic view of the relationship rather than be pushed by business lobbies who look after their parochial interests rather than the overall picture of the bilateral relationship, and that this will dissuade the American side from taking this step. Number two, there was the expectation that when we are ourselves going into an election phase, that in terms of political signaling, it would not be very helpful for the US government to do this at this stage. Thirdly, you know that President Trump does a lot of nitpicking. Even the other day, again, he brought up the whole issue of Harley Davidsons, which is almost ridiculous. But there also is that
US whiskey
kind of obsession he has that he wants to correct the trade deficit. The fourth thing that I like to say is that you see, for the Americans to say, or for anybody to say that, look, there is this trade deficit which we need to, especially for the Americans, which we need to take care of, they forget that there are other ways in which United States actually has a huge advantage in terms of international trade, not the least because of the use of dollar as the international currency. As also the fact that they have grip over all global financial US dollar transactions, the kind of sanctions they put on other countries which have implications for us. So US must take a larger view rather than this very narrow view that there is the $20–30 billion deficit.
That's right.
And therefore that puts United States at a great disadvantage, forgetting that the entire global trading system has been largely built by the United States.
Right.
So they don't take a larger strategic view.
And US exports to India grew by about 30% in this financial year.
As has been rightly said, that we can absorb this blow.
We can absorb this blow. And it's important that 4.5 billion worth of oil and gas was imported from the United States. We would be buying 300 Boeing aircraft, worth 39 billion in the next 7 years. I'd like to get in Mr. R. Gopalan very quickly. Mr. Gopalan, do you think that there is a larger message here because of the change in e-commerce rules, change in FDI guidelines? Do you think this is something that triggered this reaction from the United States?
Yeah, I have a
data localization norms.
Yeah, these were certainly behind US's minds on e-commerce, the data localization, medical devices, those kind of dairy products. Those lobbies did really work on the government, the US government, to ensure that they do something to show that, they cannot be taken for granted. But they also forget that, with the increasing prospects of, crude oil, LNG, and all other petroleum products import into the country, thanks to the shale oil boom in US, India is going to be a good market for its, goods as we go along. And on top of it, we have a very strategic, relationship, which, they should not, forget in the geopolitical, situation. So I have a feeling that probably there was a little rush into taking this decision in the part of the U.S. government, and look at the arguments used. The arguments used are, bilateral deficit. Talking of reciprocal tariffs. These are all probably smoke screen or camouflage to kind of, convey something. But these lobbies did really work hard on the U.S. government, and U.S. government took this decision, which is a thoroughly, I would say, not a very, good decision, because even if you look at it on the, the overall, we are a big importing country. Don't forget, our trade deficit is close to about $160 billion this year. We import quite a lot. It is not possible for US its products to come into this country, even if we reduce the elephant duties, for the simple reason they are not competitive with the Chinese in some of those products. So they must understand that. I do not know why they are forcing this. And this is totally, in my view, it doesn't do credit to the multilateral systems established in the WTO. It doesn't do credit at all. I would say that, this has...
All right, doesn't do credit,
on those kind of
doesn't do justice to the multilateral credit system. Okay, Mr. Gopalan, thanks for joining us. We'll request all our guests, Mr. Sibal, Ajay Sahai, Jayant Dasgupta. Let's go across to our former envoy to the WTO, Jayant Dasgupta. Mr. Dasgupta, I'd like to ask you about the trade package. Has it hit a dead end now? Do you think we can conclude this trade package that India was very hopeful about in the next few months?
to my knowledge, there was a negotiation going on about the U.S. lifting the tariffs which it had raised on our steel and aluminium products. Because apart from these two items, it hasn't really imposed tariffs, unlike the case with China. So what we were trying to negotiate was to address some of the U.S. concerns, like on Harley-Davidson motorcycles, which President Trump himself has mentioned. We have reduced by about 50%. But of course, that seems to have been accepted by the U.S., but not. It's not enough, not been enough. So I don't think there is a question of a larger package being negotiated with the U.S. It was just those two items, steel and aluminium tariffs, to be lifted, and India would not retaliate. And of course, some of the other trade concerns of the U.S. would be met through some concessions. That was the limited ambit of the negotiations going on. But that seems to have been put on hold for the moment, because India has extended the deadline to the 1st of April for imposing retaliatory tariffs against U.S. exports to India.
Right, right. So that seems to have been put on hold right now. And Mr. Ajay Sahai, do you think that is the biggest casualty of this entire exercise? We were trying to balance the trade, create opportunities for companies on both sides. Do you think the fact that there won't be any further progress, at least in the next couple of weeks, we're also going into elections, on that trade deal, do you think that's the biggest casualty currently?
In fact, I will not draw the conclusion. 60 days time is available to India. We can definitely engage with the US. Let us also keep in mind that to create a conducive environment for negotiation, we have deferred the imposition of tariff. We have to take a call on that also. But let us not lose the track that US still is our major export destination. Where export is to the tune of $85 billion plus. Lot of export is not recorded because it's in the form of intercompany transfer, in the form of IT and IT-enabled services. So we have to keep back that issue also in mind. There are a couple of issues which US has raised with regard to the export promotion schemes also. Let us not trigger it further. If we are admitting that the impact is marginal, we should not make a huge case out of it.
Okay. All right, we should not make a big case out of this. And Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, coming to you at this point, what are the options available to India at this juncture?
Well, I think I'm glad that the Commerce Secretary has said that there will be no retaliatory steps from our side. You know, we are entering into a very difficult time with all the geopolitical developments around us, especially in our region. And there are larger interests that are involved with the United States, especially with regard to the events of a few days ago, this whole terrorism issue, counter-terrorism issue, Pakistan, this and that, where we got solid support from the American side. So we have to see the totality of the relationship and not get involved into an action-reaction scenario with the United States. With regard to the trade matters, I think on the American side there has been a bit of a bullying. And on our side, we have stood our ground. The Americans have their own grievance. They say some of these issues have been long pending, and there has not been much give on the Indian side. There have been no concrete commitments made by us. Whatever we have said has remained rather vague in terms of implementation. And we have also made the argument that some of these things we can do only after the elections. With regard to medical devices, the Americans say that you know, they had made certain proposals which would prevent the hospitals from making huge profits. And on the ICT side, they say that they had actually reduced their demands to absolutely the minimum, and only in the two areas, which involve Cisco and the Apple. But our argument, which was just mentioned by one of your panelists, is very valid. That the advantage will be taken by China, not by the US companies. But somehow they have not been able to accept this argument, and there has been a bit of a frustration on our side. And finally, I think we were proposing certain concessions from our side, but on condition that there is a firm commitment by the United States not to remove the GSP preferences for us, which the United States was not willing to give. So there are grievances on both sides, but I'm glad that Commerce Secretary has said what he has said, and we don't get into this kind of retaliatory mode, which is not helpful.
Okay, and Ambassador Jayant Dasgupta, what do you feel when it comes to dairy products, for example? You rightly said that there was a lot of lobbying on the part of American companies. India has been saying that we would like the US companies also to go through a certification procedure because there are cultural sensitivities involved. What do you think is the way forward, the best way forward? Do you think eventually, if we need to convince the United States, we will also have to tweak these new e-commerce rules to please the US companies to some extent? Do you think any kind of negotiation now with the United States can only happen post the election?
We have to take into account the fact that each country will try to protect its vulnerabilities, the vulnerable sense of its producers. And milk production is done in a very decentralized manner in India. There are farmers, milk producers who own 1 or 2 heads of cattle. So we can't do something and provide access to highly subsidized dairy products from the US to come in and damage our own milk production, or for that matter from other countries which also have subsidy programs. As far as providing some concessions on e-commerce which the US has raised is concerned, that again is part of our policy to provide a level playing field for our own domestic operators, including small-scale manufacturers, including other manufacturers in India, who all have to compete on the basis of price, and they need a level playing field. So the kind of changes which were brought in by the government on the 26th of December through the Note 3, that I think goes towards protecting our interests while trying to provide a level playing field. It can't all be turned in one direction, and we can't bend over backwards to provide market access to a country at the cost of our own producers.
All right. Okay. Ambassador Jayant Dasgupta, Ajay Sahai, Kamal Sibal, thanks very much for joining us. India is just hoping that US would acknowledge the fact that exports from US have grown by 30% and 4.5 billion worth of oil and gas has also been imported from the United States. And let's not forget that major contract for Boeing aircraft as well. And these are the points that India will continue impressing upon the United States of America. Thanks for watching.